Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. Today I'm going to show you how to work a gusset heel from the top down like I did for my Sundog socks. When a gusset heel is worked from the top down, it's sometimes known as a strong heel. The name isn't related to the characteristics of the fabric, but refers to Jardine Crawford Strong, who published a pattern with this style of heel in Knitter's Magazine in 2003. Gusset heels are worked in two parts. The first part is the gusset, where you increase one stitch on each side of the sock every other round while continuing your stitch pattern across the instep stitches. The second part is the turn heel. The turn heel begins at the center of the sock at the back of the leg. The turn heel is worked back and forth in short rows to create this trapezoidal section at the bottom of the foot. You'll notice that the gusset or strong heel doesn't have any sort of rectangular heel flap, and this heel construction method doesn't require any stitches to be picked up. Let's get started. Like most heel shaping methods, half of my sock stitches are going to be for the instep and half of them will be for the heel. I've already worked in pattern across my instep stitches, so now I need to increase one stitch on each side of the heel stitches. Sometimes these increases are going to be made one stitch in from the sides of the heel, but for this pattern my increases are actually going to be the first and last stitches on each side. I'm choosing to use lifted increases, but it's okay to increase your stitches using a different method. Just make sure that you're consistent and do the same thing for the entire gusset shaping. I'm starting with a lifted increase that slants to the right, so I'm lifting the right leg of the stitch below the one that's on my left needle, and I'm going to lift that up onto the needle tip and then knit into that stitch to increase. And now I've added one stitch that wasn't there before. I like to place a stitch marker here on my needle for two reasons. One, I'm going to be continuing in my stitch pattern across the middle section of the heel, so this lets me know where to start that stitch pattern. This is also going to make it easy for me to see that I have the same number of increases on each side of the sock, because this marker separates my increases from my original stitches. So now I'm just going to knit across the remaining heel stitches till I get to the other side. When I get across to the other side of my heel, I'm going to place a second marker onto my needle. Again, this is going to separate my original heel stitches from the ones that I am increasing. And then I'm going to do another increase on the other side. And again, I'm doing a lifted increase. This time my lifted increase is going to slant to the left. So I'm going to pick up the left leg of the stitch that's 2 stitches below my right knitting needle up onto my left needle and then knit into the back of that stitch. And I've increased another stitch. So now I'm going to work one complete round of the sock with no increases. I finished my round with no increases, and from this point every increase round is going to be the same. So I'll work in pattern across my instep stitches, which I already have, and then on the heel side I'll increase one stitch on each side. Again, my first increase is a lifted increase to the right, so I'm lifting the right leg of that lower stitch up onto the left needle and then knitting it. That's my increased stitch. Then I'll knit across to the marker, slip the marker, work in pattern across my original heel stitches. Now I'll slip my next marker, knit across to the end of the heel, and then increase a stitch on the side. And again, I am using a lifted increase that slants to the left. So I'm picking up the left leg of this stitch that's 2 stitches below the one on my needle and knitting into the back of that stitch. And now I finished my increase round. So to finish my gusset, I'll continue working 1 round with no increases, followed by a round with increases. And I want to make sure as I'm doing that I have the same number of increased stitches on each side of my marker. So here now I have 2 increased stitches on each side of those markers. So I want to work those increases until I've doubled the original number of heel stitches minus 4. So my heel started with 30 stitches here, so I'm going to need to add 30 minus 4, or 26 more stitches, 13 stitches on each side of the heel. That means I'll end my gusset shaping when I have a total of 56 stitches across the heel. The turn heel begins at the center of the heel. So after I finished my gusset shaping, I worked 3/4 of a round by knitting across my instep stitches and then across half of the heel stitches. Now I'm ready to start turning the heel. These markers that were on my needles earlier to help me make sure that I had the same number of increases on each side can be removed because I don't need them anymore. The first right side row of the turn heel is simply a knit 1, then a left slanting decrease. I'm using a slip knit pass, but you could also use a slip slip knit, whichever you prefer. Just make sure to use the same type of decrease throughout the entire turn heel. And then knit 1 more stitch. Now I'm going to turn things over to the wrong side of my work. And for the first wrong side row, I'm going to slip 1 stitch, purl 3, purl 2 stitches together, and then purl 1. And then turn things over to the right side. I have a couple landmarks that I'm going to use for the rest of my turn heel shaping, and they're these gaps right here and here on either side of these central turn heel stitches. For every right side row from this point on, it's going to be the same. You slip the first stitch, knit to 1 stitch before the gap, to close up the gap, you do your left slanting decrease. Again, I'm using a slip knit pass. And then knit 1 stitch. And turn your work over to the wrong side. Every wrong side row of the turn heel is going to be the same, and I'm going to use this gap as a landmark. You slip the first stitch, purl across to 1 stitch before the gap, Close up the gap by doing a purl 2 together, and then purl 1 more stitch, and turn things over. So you continue that process throughout the turn heel until you have 2 more stitches across the heel than the original number. So I originally had 30 stitches for my heel, so I'll work my turn heel until I have 32 stitches left. I'm almost finished turning the heel of my sock. Right now I have 2 more stitches than the original number of heel stitches. So at the beginning of the gusset I had 30 stitches across the heel. Right now I have 32 stitches across the heel. So I'm still going to need to decrease 1 stitch on each side, and you'll see that I still have this 1 gap left on each side. To get started, I'm going to work 1 more right side turn heel row just like I have been. So I'm going to slip the first stitch, knit across to 1 stitch before the gap. I'll close up the gap with a slip knit pass just like I've been using. And then knit 1 stitch. Instead of turning to go back and do the wrong side, instead this is the point that I'm going to begin working in rounds again. But I need to remember when I get back to this side, there's still 1 more stitch that needs to be decreased and this gap needs to be closed. So I'm going to work across my instep stitches and then I'll show you how to close this gap. So I started the first foot round by working across my instep stitches, and now I'm at my sole stitches where the heel is, and I still need to decrease 1 stitch and close that gap. So I am simply going to knit the first stitch, I'm going to close up the gap and decrease that final stitch by working a knit 2 together. And now I have the correct number of stitches for the heel on the sole of my sock. And now I can just continue working in rounds for the remainder of the foot. I hope you enjoyed learning how to knit a gusset heel from the top down. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. If you're ready to try this heel in a pattern, head over to the shop section of thechilidog.com and look for my Sundog socks. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!